Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of the Virtual Coffee Podcast. I'm Bekah, and this is a podcast that features members of the Virtual Coffee community. Virtual Coffee is an intimate group of developers at all stages of their coding journey. And they're here on this podcast sharing their stories and what they've learned. And we're here to share it with you. Here with me today is my co-host, Dan.
Thanks, Bekah. In this episode of the podcast, we talk with Lucia Cerchie, a software engineer, mom, and Arizona transplant. We talked about the importance of having a growth mindset, asking questions, and pair programming. We also talked about the power of community and feeling comfortable asking questions and asking for help. It was a great conversation, as always, with Lucia, and I know you're going to enjoy it.
We start every episode of the podcast like we start every virtual coffee. We introduce ourselves with our name, where we're from, what we do, and a random check-in question. Today's question is, if you could write a book, what genre would you write it in? We hope you enjoy this episode. Hey, I'm Bekah. I'm from a small town in Ohio. I'm a front-end developer. And if I were to write a book, I've written one nonfiction, so I would not do it again in that genre. I would do thriller. I would write a thriller, I think.
Ooh.
Superhero thriller.
A superhero thriller. Oh, nice.
Yes.
Cross-genre. Hi, I'm Dan. I'm a front-end developer from Lakewood, Ohio. And if I could write a book, I have not written any books, so I don't have any past experience. Nonfiction's, I think I would go fantasy, but I feel like with fantasy and thriller, you really have to make sure you've connected all the dots, and everything. So, which could be fun, but also is a lot of work. But I feel like I could push through it. It'd be cool. So,
fun to map it out.
Yeah. All right, fantasy. That's my answer.
Hey, I'm Lucia. I am a software engineer from sunny Arizona. And if I had to write a book, it would definitely be fiction and probably in the sci-fi realm, just because I've been reading a lot of it recently. So yeah.
Very cool. Any good recommendations?
I have been reading a lot of the best sci-fi of this or that year collections, like short stories, and I really liked 2017's. That was a good year in sci-fi short stories, apparently.
Nice.
Cool. So welcome to the podcast. It's so good to have you here. It's always nice to see you in virtual coffee, and I know that's changed a little bit since you've taken a new job, so it's good to see you today. I always like to get started with your origin story. So how did you come to tech and where you are right now?
Yeah, I was a teacher for 4 years and transitioned into digital marketing for some software as a service startups. And I saw what the software engineers were doing there and I liked it. So I started coding last year.
Cool. And did you do a boot camp or self-taught? How did you kind of make that transition?
Yeah, I did a self-paced boot camp, which really worked well for me because I'm also a mom. And I also enjoyed doing things outside the boot camp, like blogging my journey and networking with virtual coffee and those types of things. So it felt like a really good choice for me and it's worked out well. So
That's awesome.
Yeah, nice. That was a self-paced for me too. And it was pretty much the only option for me as a mom because there was no way that I could just set aside that time for an intense boot camp that was all day or whatever.
Yeah, and I feel I learned better too doing 8 hours versus 12 hours a day. I think is a healthier pace, but yeah.
Right. It's so intense. And I think that trying to balance mental health and motherhood and career changing, that's a lot of stuff to do. And if you don't have any time and you're super exhausted from doing that all day, it just leaks into your life in a lot of ways that are usually not good.
Yeah, I gotta get that rest time in.
Okay, so you're an early career developer and you are a fairly new mom. And so you've kind of made a lot of transitions in the last couple of years. So can you kind of talk through what those transitions were like for you and how you navigated the challenges?
Yeah, they were all pretty much happening over 1 year, which is also, the year that we've had this pandemic going on. So there was a lot of changes, not all of them welcome because, all the things that happened because of coronavirus. But a lot of them were very welcome, like the birth of my daughter and the discovery of my passion for coding. And it's felt a little bit like like me and my daughter and my computer are a little bit, it's almost like an on ice flow, and like anytime I look up it's like, oh, the environment's completely changed, right? But I've got these core things that are anchoring me, like my family and that my daily practice of coding really helped me get through the past years. It was very helpful to have some things that stayed the same, like getting up every morning at the same time and still having my family in my house with me every single day. Like that sometimes, when you're in the same house with the same people, everybody knows now that can become a strain, but it's also something that you can really rely on, and it becomes a strength as well.
Right. I love that. And so I think too, there are a lot of parallels between being a mom and being a new mom and the growth that you experience, and also like career changing too, right? There's these moments that can be really great and powerful, and then there are some that are so challenging. Like, am I going to make it through this problem? I don't know if you had anything like that, or if there's any advice you want to share to moms out there listening as they're going through this too.
Yeah, moms and boot camp students. Something that I tell every boot camp student is because I came across my first really long bug, and what was helpful for me was to remember what I used to teach my students about the growth mindset, which is like, just because you don't know something now or you're starting with something now doesn't mean you can't do it, right? And when the first time I hit like a 3-day bug, I was like, oh my gosh, was I cut out to do this? Like you really start questioning yourself on your first big challenges. But I remembered the thing that I used to teach my own students about the growth mindset, and was like, oh, I understand why this was so hard for them now, because it's hard for me, but I have to I think what I did was like write down what I was feeling about it, and then write down, what the truth about the situation was, which was that I was learning about how to debug things and that it was going to be fine. And, in a few weeks I'd have my website out there. And that helped me kind of externalize that growth mindset a lot better. It was super helpful, but it's also totally normal to, hit the first huge challenge in coding and feel that feeling of like, oh no, and am I cut out for this? It's something that I think everybody may feel, unless, they're completely bathed in that growth mindset from early childhood, which not everybody is, but everybody may feel it at one point or another when they're on this journey.
Yeah, I love that. I like and I feel like that's true, not just with career change. Any big transition, or any new thing you're trying to get into. There's always, I don't know about always, but it's a very common thing, right? To run into some huge thing, and that am I cut out for this question is, I don't know, it's very real and hard to sometimes get through, and it'll interfere with actually solving the problem or whatever it is, too. If you keep.
Yeah. And that happens with parenthood too, right? Sometimes I look at my kid and like, oh, that's my child. Whoa. And imposter syndrome can rear up there too. And that can make you, it can make you compare yourself to other parents, in good or bad ways, things like that. It's less of like, when is my daughter going to discover that I'm not a mom, I'm 3 owls in a trench coat, and more like, am I a good parent? You know what I mean? But at the same time, just like with coding, it's like, I've got to where I am now. I'll keep improving. Your kid is alive. You're alive. You guys have this relationship, and it's a wonderful thing. And there's nothing that can change the power of that relationship. So
that's awesome. definitely have had plenty of am I cut out for this moments with the kids over the last almost 5 years. Yeah, Ben's about to be 5 here on Sunday. So, I can relate anyway.
I've got an 11-year-old and I still sometimes feel like that, like I did this 4 times. I still am not sure whether or not I am any good at what I'm doing, but I think it is, you push through those moments and then you think about those other moments. And I always try and tell people who are new to coding to look at how much they've grown. So they're like, I haven't made any progress. But if you look at where you were last month or a year ago, or even yesterday, you probably have grown. Sometimes it's big leaps and sometimes it's tiny steps, but it's still forward progress.
Right.
And I think that it can be hard to recognize those subtle moments, but it's super important.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And it can also be helpful to look at your own children, I think, kind of in the context of what they're learning, because childhood is an incredible time of growth and they make just such big leaps and bounds, like looking back on it last year, I remember like holding my 2.5-month-old daughter in one arm. She couldn't hold her head up while I was like, writing my first lines of JavaScript with the other arm. And it's like, oh, we've both come. So like she's almost walking and here I am, having dealt with the databases and deployed things when I didn't even know how to pull something up in a local host, when I started.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned earlier was like part of your process was writing, like writing things down, like working, you were talking about working through the huge bug or whatever. And I've been, I don't know, I like noticed and admired your, like, just your sort of, I don't know what the right word is, but I don't know, you were writing a lot. and I thought that was really cool. I was wondering if you, like, if you started out with the plan of, learning and writing as you learn, or if you came to it naturally, or if it was like part of an assignment for for your boot camp, or like how did you get yourself to do that as like while you were learning to code and everything like that?
So at first it was definitely very intimidating thinking of blogging what I was doing, because it felt like just another thing to learn to do. But I think it was eventually going to happen anyway, because I write to process almost everything in my life. So writing is like a natural way for me to learn something. So I eventually started doing that just to be able to process things. Or if I wanted to learn something, sometimes I had to assign myself a blog post, But I just found that a really, really helpful way of going about it. And it's just nice to have something out there to also not just to learn something, but to look at where you like to have a marker of where you were, right? Because I've learned things. I've written blog posts that were either just like, oh, that was just the wrong way to think about it, or this was kind of like an older way of going about solving this problem, and someone in the comments brought up a new way to do it. But that, like, it records that moment in time for me, which I think is really helpful, just to see, okay, this is where I've come, this is where I started. Just kind of going with that whole growth theme.
And I feel like you push yourself so much, or I don't know if this is a natural thing or if you work on getting out of your comfort zone, but you're blogging. We did our first round of lightning talks in November and you were there doing a talk, and you're confidently asking questions, which I think is a really hard thing. And so, is this been pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, or, how do you channel that confidence? Because I think that is something that can be really hard to do.
I would say a little bit of it is probably being an extrovert in a pandemic. So there's a lot of me that wants to get out there and communicate in all the ways that I can right now, which is not in person. So that includes giving talks and joining groups and asking questions. But another part is something I've been trying to do over the past year. And this applies to, I think, parenting too, but it's like your comfort zone is not a place of growth. Like it's okay to be there for a little bit, if you need to just have some time to rest. But it's where improvement comes is from kind of like being completely out of, like, not completely uncomfortable. Like there's psychological safety that always needs to be there, right? But just being like, oh, this is new. This is something that I haven't done before, and yeah, it's a little uncomfortable because of that. But if I don't keep doing that, then there's no learning happening.
Let's talk about, I want to kind of move forward with the conversation about all the stuff that you're doing and this idea of confidence. And, I want to touch maybe a little bit more specifically on asking questions and the experience that you have with pairing, because I think that that's one of the things that I missed out on a lot at boot camp. And along the way, some people had said like, well, you should try pairing more, but it wasn't naturally set up. And I didn't understand the value until I started working, because you learn and you grow so much, but also it can be a really scary experience. And I know that a lot of people are hesitant to do that. So, why did you start asking people to pair, and how was that experience?
Well, it was because I was comfortable in virtual coffee. It provided a safe environment for me to be like, I'm running into this bug in this framework I've never worked with before. I know you have. Would you like to pair with me? Can you navigate me? And that's been the essence of a lot of the pair programming. I really like Martin Fowler's article on it, but it also doesn't have to fit into any of those definitions. It's just two people, same piece of code. Another thing I've run into out there that I think leads to some of the intimidation around pair programming is that there's like a perception that you have to reach a certain level or know a certain amount of tools to start doing it. It's like, no, like there's no reason you can't just pair on your first few lines of HTML. There's absolutely no reason. So that's another thing that I just think is out there, that it's just a perception that needs to change.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just even I came to pairing sort of organically, mostly through virtual coffee too, and hadn't read any of the articles. I hadn't read any of that stuff, and so it never really even occurred to me to that people would be hesitant or whatever about the actual process, because I guess mostly because I just didn't know there was a formal process to know. But you and I have had some really good pairing sessions too. I found as a teaching tool, it's one of my favorite modes too, right? Because two people can just kind of work together and work through a thing, and instead of as opposed to somebody asking, trying to copy whatever the bug is in from your console and hope that somebody can find the answer, just kind of work, hanging out and going working through something together. Always just seems like it's just one of my favorite ways to both learn and help and teach.
Yeah. And it's like you said, there's an efficiency aspect to it too, where you're not just going back and forth with screenshots, trying to recreate the environment. It's definitely, I think, saves time, but also builds relationships between programmers, and maybe you could say more about this, Dan or Bekah, but I've heard a lot of a theme I've heard in virtual coffee a lot is that both navigator and driver get to learn. It's not just one or the other. That's not how it goes. And I was wondering, as people who have navigated a lot, I wonder what that's been like for you guys.
Yeah, I want to say, I've been on both sides a lot in the last year, and I have learned so much. And I do think that you hit on something, this idea of psychological safety or feeling comfortable asking within the community, because I think that just kind of decreases the feeling of I'm taking a risk here. And what is the risk really if you pair with someone and you don't know what you're doing? You just don't know, right? And then you have an opportunity to learn and you have an opportunity to grow. But I know even when I've paired with people on their projects, when they were asking for help, I had to look stuff up and ask questions, and just that ability to have the conversation, the back and forth. Like, we for sure were both growing through that conversation, whether it's how we communicate with each other, or I hadn't thought about it that way. Let's kind of explore that and walk through it. Can be a really great way to get a better understanding of different ways that people interact with code, how they think about things, and that inform your process going forward. And so I think it's been, one of my favorite things of the last year, being able to pair with so many different people.
Yeah, I totally agree. You're always going to learn things looking at, like, learning about how people solve problems in their own way. And every new code base has a whole bunch of stuff to learn about, even if it's tech that you know, ostensibly, there's always stuff to learn. And I was going to say the driver navigator thing was never really a formal thing in my mind, and I know that it can be helpful for people to sort of navigate the social structure, but at least at the beginning, before you've worked together enough to build up a rapport, but it's just such a useful tool. And you're right. Everybody should be learning can be learning all the time. I've heard stories of people having, bad experiences with pairing. And most of the time it's because of usually the person who is hoping to learn something, and asking for help. And then the other person, I don't know, just I don't really know what the right phrase is, but just drives without any input, if we're going to use the driver navigator, then the driver is driving, but not actually asking for navigation. Right. Or something like that. Right. The, just kind of powering through something without actually communicating and working together. And I feel like that just misses the point, I'm sure there's a million YouTube videos of whatever that problem is, that somebody could go watch as a passive observer, but the pairing, it's in the name, right? It's actually a pair. It's not just teaching or something, or not just learning, it's
and I think that can there's a lot of strict definitions out there, right? But I think it can at least be helpful for the people in the session to talk to each other about it, just lay some expectations, this is how long we're going to do it. This is what this relationship is. We're a team on whatever this is, and we're learning from each other. It's just a few things like that before it gets started. And that way you can avoid, hopefully, some of those experiences.
When I did coding club pre-pandemic, one of the rules was you could never take the keyboard or the mouse from someone else, right? And I think that's kind of what happens in these situations. So they're not necessarily physically taking it, especially if you are remote. But if you just kind of don't communicate, you don't talk through things, then you are taking that away. You're taking away that person's voice. You're taking away their ability to play an active role. And both people, the driver and the navigator, should be taking an active role in what's happening.
I like that a lot. I'm thinking about it more. It seems like a really great analogy to describe what happens, and could be extended to, I think, other situations in tech too. It's just a lot to think about. But yeah,
I was just imagining physically pulling a keyboard from somebody's hands, I don't know. Sorry. There's a scene.
It's even just give me the computer, and then they just move it and start doing the typing. Anyway. There's a scene.
Oh yeah, no. It was a NCIS or one of those shows, and the two tech people, one person was typing and trying to solve the thing, and the other person said, "Move over," and instead of that person moving over and the second person typing on the keyboard, they both just started typing on the keyboard, just different sides of the keyboard at the same time, which, it's funny. I don't think very effective pairing method.
Yeah, but I think it's, in a way, the fact that most pairing has moved to Zoom has made us better at communicators, because it can get a little bit frustrating when you're no, the button at the top right and then because I don't know my left from right, I'm like, oh, the other right. Like, sometimes you have to think about the words that you're using to describe what you mean. And there's kind of a list of little helpful things you can do, like go by line number, not by like what the word is and the function, and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And like thinking about that, there's like a lot of general things like that help. And then if you pair with the same person, enough, like I feel like it's a two-way street, but you start to learn, how to navigate, the way that their brain works or whatever, which is different for everybody. That's kind of cool too. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just like with everything. It's just like the more you do it, the more effective it'll be, for yourself and for your team, stuff like that. So you recently started a new job, right?
I did, yeah. It's at StepZen. We're one API for all your data. That's the tagline, and I'm really enjoying it. It's been great. It's a startup, and we're all remote. We have a meeting every day, a stand-up meeting every day, at least one, and then yeah. So it's fun. It's been fun meeting everybody, but it's also, I think this is probably experience a lot of people are going through, but it's been interesting starting a job without having met anyone at it. And we hope to meet each other someday, but it's still not going to be within the next few months. And that's also been something that's been hard for me with virtual coffee too. I would just love to fly and see some of you, but it's been tough with but it's also like opened up some doors. Like I think I'm trying to think here. Like I don't know that I would have joined virtual coffee if the pandemic hadn't happened, and the startup that I'm at expanded to remote because of it, and that's why I was eligible, because they were in, I think, California exclusively beforehand. So yeah.
Is there? I was really just going to ask if there's any pairing going on, at the new job, or if that's part of the company at all.
I haven't seen it as part of like the defined protocol, but I've paired a lot with people already.
Yeah, nice. Yeah,
I like doing that. It's been good. It's been fun. It's definitely a culture where I feel very comfortable asking questions, and it's encouraged. So I've been appreciating that a lot. Feels a little bit like pairing in virtual coffee. So
that's awesome. What is like one way that they made you comfortable being able to ask questions?
It was really like so far it's been modeling. So I've just seen everybody from the CEO to like the hire just before me. Not that we're like on a flat structure right now, but they've all been comfortable just like popping the Slack and being like, hey, I'm running into this error. Like, does anybody know what's up here? And that has really, really helped me feel more comfortable just coming out there and asking my own questions. And there have been some of my teammates have been very strong in showing that, like, they've been in the field for many more years than I have, and they're still have like a growth mindset, and I just appreciate that so much. I think those are. I'm new to the idea of like what you call like psychological safety, Bekah, but I've a feeling that that's part of it. So yeah, I'd like to hear more of like about what you think is part of that definition.
Yeah, we're going to have an episode coming up this season that's going to talk a lot about psychological safety. And I'm really excited for that because I think, I think I have heard that term before, but hadn't really thought about it that much until hearing so many different stories through virtual coffee, and especially the places that do not create psychological safety, right? Where there's micromanaging going on and there's constant there's a lack of appreciation. There is a lack of acknowledgement that you're making progress. And instead, it's just this, you need to keep doing these things over and over. And it doesn't matter how much you do because it will never be enough. And there are people who will always be right. And there are people who will always be wrong, right? Like there are just these behaviors that are totally unreasonable. And I think totally miss that you have a human being in front of you, right? And so instead of like recognizing this is a person and I want to support this person, it's like this is a being that does work and I only care about their productivity and how much I can control that more than anything else, right? So there's a dehumanization that happens in environments where there's a lack of psychological safety. And so when you are in a positive environment, I think sometimes that's when you really recognize that, oh, wait a minute, maybe that place didn't allow me to grow. Because when you're so caught up in just trying to feel safe, it's very hard to grow. You're just in protection mode.
Right. Yeah. Because you won't, you're going to be inside your comfort zone out of defense at that point. Right. Which is, I don't know, something I've been very lucky so far, I believe, just with virtual coffee and at my new job, just to have been in environments of safety like that. But I'm trying to think of times where it was like I was at a restaurant job as a teenager where there was definitely no psychological safety present whatsoever. So I'm sure everybody has had an experience, and I think talking about it will help people define those experiences and help them avoid them in the future. So I think that's going to be a good episode. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, the topic of feeling comfortable asking questions, I feel like comes up a lot in virtual coffees, discussions with newer devs. I lost my point. I don't really know. I was just going to say, like, it's a pretty common struggle that I think that some newer devs struggle with is being able to feel comfortable asking questions or showing that it's okay to ask questions. And I was just going to say it's really cool that your new company at StepsIn, like the modeling, the modeling that behavior is, I'm pretty sure how you phrased it. And I think that's perfect. Like that's the way that it seems to me the best way to do that, right, is to have more experienced devs model it, because as we all know or should know, at least more experienced devs also still have lots of questions all the time, and like it's just a very natural, normal thing for a developer. It's just part of being a developer, right, is not knowing a thing, and then you like, I don't know, you work on it, and then you ask, you get stuck and ask a question, and like it's just like the circle of life or whatever.
It's also part of being human, right?
Right. Yes.
And yes. I think it comes up it should come up probably in every professional field, right? Because being human means to learn. But I think it comes up a lot in our field because it changes so quickly, and that just means you're learning a lot all the time. And there are, I think, some perceptions out there in tech that you might just be born being an extremely natural coder. And it's like, it's really, anybody can learn how to do it. They just have to invest the time, and I think that's important to get out there too. There's some
yeah, and I think another piece of that is that so many people learn on their own in various ways, like both of you, did, and I mean, and I did too. Like it's you come at it at your own angle, and I don't know. There's until you work at a company, or until you find a community like virtual coffee, there's your peers are it's hard to know, how to find the normalized behavior for, what is normal for a new developer, or And if most of what you do is read, follow Twitter, follow like people with like millions of followers on Twitter, or, blog posts where who knows who it is, it can be easy to get the perception that like it's important to just know everything, or the only successful people like know everything and don't ever ask questions, which is just like very much not the case. So
yeah, and that's kind of, it makes me think of parenting too. It's like
yes.
But the thing about parenting, I think it kind of taught me how to do this when I started learning to code too. Is like I don't have time to not ask for help when I need it anymore. You know what I mean? It's just like I have a daughter and I'm responsible for her. And if I need help being responsible for her, I am going to ask for that help right away, and when it came to coding, like in college, I used to like sit and struggle over things for hours and hours and hours before asking someone to help me with it, and there is definitely, you want to have the experience of your like 3 day to a week to who knows how long working on that one bug, because everybody's going to have that and it'll come up again and again. I'm not saying that's not part of it, but when I was doing boot camp, when I needed to ask for help, I was going to go do that. As soon as I realized it would become more valuable for me to learn that from someone else than for me to keep struggling. Because there is that balance there where it's like, there's value in the struggle and learning how to do things yourself. But there's also a point where it's like, okay, the cost benefit analysis makes it such that I need to go ask for help right now, and that's been something that's been super helpful.
Yeah, that's a great point to keep in mind, right? Especially once you're working for somebody, is, you're spending their money, right, when you're working. And I forget who was one of our guests. I don't know if it was our guest or somebody on a virtual coffee, like just one of our talks, but somebody had, the company they worked for had sort of a sliding scale.
Drew,
was it Drew? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So so they had like a sort of general rule of if you're like stuck, like spinning wheels stuck for X, like an hour or something, that like, that's when you should reach out and ask a question or, something like that. But then on certain projects, they would change the scale, they all sort of knew what that meant. And then the managers or whoever would, running a project would say, okay, this project is like, there's a lot of more moving pieces, or I don't know, it's higher priority or something like that. And so, for this project, we're going to bump that up to half an hour instead of an hour, like that. And I think that was kind of it was a cool way to approach it, that modulating like how long you take to, dig into a problem before you reach out, and, things like that. I feel like can change per team and per person, and will change over the course of your career too. But,
yeah.
I will say personally, it doesn't get any easy, like trying to figure that, like when that line is, it's like, it's not always easy to figure out.
Yeah. And then if you're on the more junior side and you're asking help, sometimes what's in your head is like, oh no, am I going to waste their time? But recently I realized, you have to flip the tables. Like, you're on the clock here. You're going to save some time by asking for help and getting it done.
Yeah. And I mean, you said this, the struggle is like important too, like it's like, obviously you don't want to just like, it's the second you get stuck, ask random question, but I don't know, it's just something to learn and practice. But it's just like the idea of being able to like feeling comfortable at being able to ask questions is very important, and something to I don't know, take heart in and practice at as well.
Yeah. Something I tell myself, which I also used to tell my students, is like, what can they do? Take away your birthday? Like, what are they going to do?
That'd be so sad.
Yeah. But nobody has the power to do that. So I'm just going to go and ask my question. Yeah.
I think, Lucia, you and I have both come from teaching backgrounds. And for me, it almost made it harder to ask questions because I had spent 10 years like in front of the classroom answering questions, right? And there was an expectation that I would know all of the answers to all of the questions. And there's a total different mindset in tech. So it took me a while to try and transition from those like learned habits of you don't ask the questions because you're the one that should be answering them. But I think you've done a much better job than I have. But how has your background, I guess, in teaching kind of informed how you've approached all of this?
So I was a literacy coach, and that meant I was dealing with a lot of students from very different backgrounds, and a lot of them had learning differences because of I was meeting students who usually were falling below the mark for reading, right? And so I think it gave me it made me more like understanding of myself when I was running into a problem. And it's like, okay, like, you're a new mom and it's a pandemic and you have a lot going on. So maybe like instead of, imposing needless suffering on yourself, go for a walk and take a break and then come back to this later, and with a fresh brain. And that, I think it's important for everybody to be on, this kind of goes back to parenting, but for everybody to be on the teaching and learning side, because both coding and teaching are in my family. Like I have a lot of uncles who do those two professions. And my dad he had taught for 20 years, then he went back to get his PhD. And after he came back from getting his PhD, he told me, like, I am so gentle with my students now because I understand the strains that go on outside of just student life. Like they're not just a student right now to me, like they have everything, they're whole people. And going back to school for him while being a dad helped him understand that. And I think, again, just having that perspective with yourself when you're learning something new is really important. Just like, keep going. If get stuck though, like just take a break and then come back to it. Cause there's no reason, there's no rule that says you can't just like take 10 minutes to breathe. Yeah. And I get
I'm so bad at that.
I breathing like while coding. Oh my gosh. Sometimes I realize like I'm dizzy from going purple because I like have been holding my breath while debugging. It's
yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm glad that I'm not the only person in the world.
I just realized I did that the other day, and then I Googled it, and like it's a thing. I can't remember what the term is, but it was like computer something.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. I'm gonna have to Google that too, because I definitely do that. Or I like will be breathing like incredibly shallowly just through my nose, and like I don't. Yeah. Man, that's. All right.
I don't know what's triggering that. It's not like there's a bear chasing me or anything.
Right.
Just
well, yeah, maybe that's like fight or flight or something. Or wait, was it?
Email apnea. That's what it's called.
Email apnea.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah.
The vortex.
Well. Yeah. So, a former Apple executive coined that term, or it's credited to her, Linda Stone. But it describes the long periods where you go without breathing or hold your breath without realizing it while at your desk or while at work. I like do it all during the day, and I just noticed it the other day. I was like, oh, I've been holding my breath for a while now. Like when I get into deep thought mode, I don't know, my brain needs to be reminded that it should be breathing.
Yeah, it's like, I have too much going on. I'm not going to modulate breathing.
Not important.
Yeah, that's why I like yoga. But it's another whole other thing.
No, yeah, that kind of stuff, the taking a walk, the breathing, it's so important and so hard to do without practice. I assume it gets better with practice. I couldn't exactly tell you because I'm still really bad at it. But it's so important. It's so useful, like such a useful tool even to solving problems, right? Just like you were saying, it just like take the walk, go away from your computer and it will be better. It's like every time I do it, I'm like, why don't I just do this every time,
Yeah. Even just like do a chore, like load the dishwasher and then in the middle of it, you'll be like, oh, I need to check my environment variables. Get out. Staring at your screen, it sometimes becomes unproductive.
Yes, absolutely.
I listened to a...
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I listened to a podcast recently where a neurologist was talking about that. And that was the first time when I was like, oh, yeah, maybe I should listen to people's advice. But once you hit a certain age, it's hard to create like neuroplasticity or whatever in your brain. And so you have to approach it differently. So as a kid, like you could keep going through that, trying and trying and trying, and you would learn it because of, you know, your ability to create those pathways as a kid. But like once you get older, it's harder to do. And the better tactic he was saying was you go until the point of frustration and then like maybe a little bit more, and then you take a break and then you go back to it and keep going in that pattern. And as adults, that's how our brain creates those pathways that we need to learn. And I thought, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. And taking that walk, like this is a strategy for learning and growing. And so there's like the science behind that too.
My wife was, I don't remember exactly where she learned this, but was this phrase about like treating yourself like this is actually like abusive, you know? I mean, like not taking the breaks, like not, you know, like treating this. I mean, it affected me because it was like, okay, the way I treat myself sometimes where I'm like really deep into something. And it helped to, so it's just like, imagine if instead of yourself, you're like forcing some other person to sit at this desk until this thing is solved, and like
and you're not allowed to breathe.
Not allowed to breathe, not allowed to go to the bathroom or whatever. Like, you know, like you must sit there and just imagine you're doing that to somebody else instead of yourself, you know? And that's been like incredibly instructive to me, like, and helpful. Like, I don't know. It was just like a weird way to, like, you could kind of like imagine like you're making these choices, but like for somebody else, and your choices are going to be probably much different than what you're forcing yourself to do sometimes, you know? It's like, you know, I see my kid, like, whatever. I'm like, okay, he needs a break. Like, let's just, you know what I mean? Like, it's very obvious sometimes with a 3-year-old or 4-year-old or whatever, like we just need to remove him from the situation for a little bit, you know? And if it was myself, you know, I wouldn't, you know, you just kind of keep like banging my head against my keyboard or whatever. And if I saw somebody doing that, I'd be like, hey, go take a walk.
Right.
You know?
My daughter makes noise like, whenever that happens. You're like, okay, it's time to remove her from the situation. But yeah, sometimes it's hard to like, and she'll do that for like 2 minutes straight. But yeah, it's hard to monitor those things for yourself just because you can't, sometimes it's as simple as you just can't see yourself because your eyes are in your own head. So, but it's important to find ways to be able to monitor yourself.
We kind of talked about this in Gant's podcast episode too, where he was saying just this idea of knowing your body and the things that you do, and then kind of exploring like, oh, my body did this thing. Like, why did it do that thing? Or what's going on here? And it's really interesting to kind of do that monitoring as we go through these different problems, right? Because I think like, you know, I was holding my breath or, you know, whatever. There are certain, like our body gives us the indications, but we're ignoring the notifications of our body, right? Like, but approaching that and saying like, okay, look, here's some evidence that this thing is about to happen. Or I'm getting a little bit better about like that with my anxiety of things like, oh, I've just felt this way. Now I know what comes next here. And this is the opportunity for me to try and move in a different direction. And I think that those things, like recognizing those, are super important. And that's how we help ourselves to grow too, right? By listening to what our body or whatever is telling us.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, it's amazing how smart your body is.
Okay, so you have been going through this journey, right, of a lot of different things that you've talked about here. And so what are some of the most important tools that you think have helped you to make it through and get to where you are now?
Oh man, that's a big question. Because there's so many things. I've had a supportive family, you know, and supportive friends. I've had a year in digital marketing, which is really helpful, I think, for job searching. I could probably do a whole other podcast on that. But I think the family and friends thing is really big too, though, because like my husband and we're both working from home now, and we've been on our computers 8 hours a day with the baby, during the pandemic, and that's not easy. So we've like constantly been having conversations about like, okay, how are you doing? Do you need any support here? And like, how are you feeling? Is like this, you have the baby from this hour to that hour, and I have her from that hour to that hour. Is this working for today? So doing that has been really key. And so has having virtual coffee, because I started when you can't like go somewhere and meet people. So most of my friends I've made in tech are online, and the support I get there is online. And a lot of that has come from virtual coffee. Also from like the willingness to just ping random people who seem like they know things and be fun to talk to on Twitter. That's less safe than like within the community of virtual coffee, obviously, but it's also had some really good results for me. I have enjoyed talking to some people on there. Like there's one guy who made a recursive tweet. His name is Oshin Moran, and he was like just willing to talk to me for a half hour about how he worked with the API to like, it was a retweet of the same tweet that was the tweet. Like it's hard to even describe it, but he did it, and it was pretty cool to talk about it. Yeah, so just being able to, I think, rely on community is really important for anybody just starting this journey out, because you can't. I mean, sometimes it feels like you're coding on an island because you're in your house on your computer coding, but you're not, and nobody can code on an island and learn how to do it, especially by themselves. So
there's no Wi-Fi on the island. Sorry. I think that what you just said about like randomly pinging people has been one of the things that I decided to do this year. I don't know why. Like, what are you going to lose? And so then I've been able to talk to people who have so much more experience than I do. And almost everybody has been really generous with their time in walking me through those things. And I think that, sometimes that feels risky, but it's not.
I mean, there's definitely like a safety thing with like Zoom bombing, but if you pick someone who is like public enough on Twitter to be accountable, then I think there's a certain level of safety there. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the other things that you said that I really liked is you have this background in digital marketing, and that's been helpful. And I was talking to a hiring manager at a pretty large company recently, and one of the things that he was saying was, people need to approach the job search like it's marketing, because you are marketing yourself. And you found a job, I feel like it was pretty quickly. So can you just talk a little bit about how those two kind of work together?
Yeah. So I finished boot camp right before I started this job. And I was thinking of a job search as something that I was going to be doing 8 hours a day, which ended up not being the case, which was nice. So what I was doing during boot camp, it was a long boot camp too, right? It's like 9 months. It was every day I was pinging people, like random people to talk to, just to start building my community. I was tweeting. I did the 100 Days of Code thing on Twitter that gets you in the habit of sharing what you're doing pretty consistently, and that was helpful. I was blogging. I was going to virtual coffee, and if I saw a job that really made sense for me to apply to, in the sense of that, like, I either knew the person or they had approached me first, then I would apply. And so that was what my job search was like. And I had several interviews too, and that's what it was like. But I feel like it was like knowing to like, okay, I should make a portfolio site, because I can't just have these skills. I need to communicate that I have them, and I need to do that in a very online way. And that there's just a bunch of things habits that I naturally had from my year in digital marketing. Like consistency is more important than volume when it comes to like being on Twitter, for example, or things like just like, this is a nice color scheme and it's a little bit different from every other color scheme I've seen out there. So I'm going to use it for my portfolio website. Now I want to go back and redesign it because I realized it was not accessible. But, like there are things like that do help. And, I'd love to, maybe do a brown bag on that for virtual coffee people, because in a way, it's almost not fair that that's the way it is now, because sometimes like there's a lot of these jobs where you are doing marketing as you're coding. That's a lot of what my job is like right now. But some of them you'll just be coding, and it's hard because it feels like you have to learn 2 jobs in order to get one, but there are a few tips I think that can really, really help with that. And investing little bits of time along the way through your boot camp can be really helpful and make it a lot easier afterwards, I think.
Do you what piece of aside from actually learning the coding part, not to aside that because that's hard and everything.
Yeah, that's the thing.
What do you think was the most impactful thing that you did over that, to help this process? Was it the blogging, or was it, if you had to just pick the top of the list?
Ooh, that's a hard one.
What do you think the most impactful thing was that helped you, find a pretty awesome job?
I mean, I could ask the people who hired me, but yeah, but as far as getting all the interviews that I did get, I think I did not take the scattershot approach of just applying to literally every job on LinkedIn and Indeed. And I've heard that has worked for some people, so I'm not saying the way that I did is the only way, but I did make sure that I had a connection every time I applied, and I, would mention it in my cover letter. And so that was definitely helpful, but I think blogging about what I did was probably the best thing. And it can be a little bit difficult to learn how to do it, but I had done it in my previous job, so it was a little bit easier to pick it up. But then again, I'm trying to think what I'm trying to say here. If you've never done it before, you shouldn't be afraid of it. Just pick it up. It doesn't have to be a fancy topic. It doesn't have to be even a new topic if you're just starting out, just because blogging is new to you and what you're trying to learn to do is learn how to blog, right? So it's the most important thing there, I think, is to just get started, because it shows in a way that someone who's looking at your portfolio can digest that you think about, the things that you're thinking about. And if they've gotten to that point, then it can maybe even segue into a conversation later, which has happened a lot in interviews. And it's kind of a natural way to discuss something that you're interested in, which is always, I think that's a good strategy in interviews, is try to direct the conversation to something you're interested in, because you want to show your passion. And unless you're actually interested in it, you're not going to be able to show your passion for that. It's not going to naturally come up in your tone of voice and in your face, right? So, yeah.
Oh, I think that's great. I think it's great. I'm glad you, I thought maybe I led you there, but I'm glad you said blogging. I think that it's incredibly important especially for developers who are hoping to find a job. It's one of those things that will, in my opinion, set you far apart much more than a random portfolio side project-y thing that isn't, those projects are good for learning and important to do, but if you're not writing about it alongside, then it, it doesn't mean much to somebody who's looking at your portfolio site, like you said,
because occasionally, unfortunately, some boot camps really hold your hand through those, or they'll all have the same type of portfolio project, so.
Right. And absolutely. And there's no way to really know what, if any of that is the case, if as somebody who's just looking at them. Right. But if I can read about your struggles, going through it, or what you learned, or whatever, however you just approaching it, I don't know, it makes a huge difference. Plus, it shows some communication skills, which even if you're just developing and not doing any marketing, communication skills remain very, 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 very important. And writing, writing is just part of communication, but if you can manage to convince your brain that it's part of like learning how to be a good developer, which I think it is, but I feel like for anybody listening who's on the fence about it, I feel like it will go a long way.
And it's okay to not know everything in a blog post. Like I think that almost the main thing in communication is understanding what you don't understand,
Absolutely.
Like that's always where you want to start a conversation too, if you're not sure with the other person, but being able to define that is a huge, huge thing.
Yes, I 100% agree. Yep. Again, we were talking about the exact same thing about that, like starting blogging and, not knowing everything, and like that it can actually be a virtue, and help your people reading trust you more if you are sort of honest about what you don't know,
that kind of goes into asking for help too. It's okay to be vulnerable without being apologetic.
Yes,
it is not your fault that you don't know. Right. But you can admit that you don't, and that's fine.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice. And you hit on so many important things in this episode. I really love that idea of it's about consistency more than volume, I think that you said. And the idea of, like being open and being out there and communicating. So thank you so much for talking through your journey and for being here with us on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me a platform to have this conversation on. I always enjoy talking to you guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Virtual Coffee Podcast. This episode was produced by Dan Ott and Bekah Weigel and edited by Dan Ott. If you have questions or comments, you can hit us up on Twitter at virtualcoffee.io, or you can email us at podcast@virtualcoffee.io. You can find the show notes, plus you can sign up for our newsletter to find out what Virtual Coffee's been up to on our website at virtualcoffee.io.
Please subscribe to our podcast and be sure to leave us a review. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.